Okay, so let's talk about heat sinks. The heat sink is the thing that connects to the CPU and it cools the thing down. And here's a real fancy one I've clicked on here. Let's make it big. You can see this thing's all about cooling. And this little guy down here, this little square, will actually adhere directly to the processor. And so what happens is this thing is just pulling all the heat or dissipating it and getting rid of it so that the processor doesn't burn up. And so it's very, very, very critical that we get a good one so our computer doesn't burn up. But they're almost all good in that respect. Usually the stock Intel heat sinks that most processors come with are more than sufficient. But for in home recording land, if we've got the computer in our room and we don't have it in another the closet or any way to isolate it, this is going to be probably the most obnoxious element in making a computer loud. So it's very, very important that we get a quiet one. So let's talk about how my process would be. That you don't need a whole lot of computer knowledge to figure out what heatsink is good for you, and let me explain why. Because I really have no idea, because this stuff is always changing. I've got heat sinks that I found that were really good deals, and assuming this isn't overly dated, and it may be, there's let's see, something 212. Let's look at this. The Cooler Master 212 was a really great for the money, $20. There it is right there. Hyper 212. This is one I just happened to know about because when it came out, it was a breakthrough in terms of being fairly quiet and being cheap and being really good at cooling. This thing is gigantic. It's much. The picture doesn't really do it justice, and there's no way to compare it to anything. But let's just say it's 2020. What do I get? Well, I would work this. Here's my process. My first step would be I would look at my processor, and it's going to have very specific needs. And in this case, remember that LGA 1155. It's just the type of processor this is. That's all we really need to know. And so here's what I'm going to do. Here's my ultra secret method for always getting a good heatsink. I'm going to go to Google, and I'm going to type in that top, CPU type, and then I'm going to put quietest heatsink. All right, and Google puts whatever, and Quiet PC USA, which I assume is some company that or website that specializes in this sort of thing. It spits out a few, okay, but I was really kind of hoping for like a top 10. What's the quietest one I can get? Well, and actually I already know. Here's some of the new ones that have kind of blown my mind. It's still debated whether these things are good enough to cool a recording computer that's being pushed really hard, but this particular CPU cooler, I was going to call it fan, but it has no fan. And that's where the technology is going. And you may have seen my article on this recently, is there are fanless computers that are actually relatively inexpensive, not a whole lot more than what we can build them for. But they're, I don't know, I haven't tested them myself, and some guys say they run a little hot. I don't know if that's true. It all could be hogwash. Anyway, but this particular cooler is $100. So I have to call them coolers. I guess I should go back to heatsink. But what I would do, and it'd be just like researching a car or anything else that's new. Unfortunately, I don't know of any website like CPU Benchmark, which ranks CPU processors in terms of speed and performance and all that in dollars. I wish they had something like that for heatsinks where we could just look. And so this definitely does become a guessing game. But often, and see, LGA 1155 is one particular keyword we can use. There are more. And let me go back to our Newegg. Where are we at? Okay, there we are. We could also look for anything that specs for this thing. So i7 would be one. 3770K is the exact CPU. We're kind of thinking of the family of CPU. But Ivy Bridge might be a good one. That's the kind of the spec. That's also the family. This is all stupid little words. Again, I wish there was a simpler way to be able to discern what all these little bitty tidbits of information mean. But let's go back to our search and see if we can. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to keep piling through until we find one. Okay, and so then we got this particular forum, which who knows? They're going to make recommendations, and then you got the usual forum crap where that's mostly useless. However, sites like Tom's Hardware are usually pretty cool. But I was hoping for an article or something that would really list a whole bunch of really great bang for the buck CPUs, coolers. But when that, you're going to probably end up like you do most of the time on forums, frustrated and pissed off. So what I do once that happens is we can actually look at the specs on these things. And there's a handful of specs you need to know. Okay, so what we're going to do here in Newegg, let's go shopping, and we're going to click on, what is it, heat sinks and coolers, or this is taking away too. Fans and heat sinks. Okay, so we click on that, and then they're going to show a whole bunch of fancy new ones. Yeah, see, this one's $100, but that's water cooled, which is another way to go. I've never done the water cooling thing. Some guys have fried their systems because water shot everywhere. Other guys have used them for decades and never had a problem. Some guys say they're amazing. Other guys say that that they're loud as a fan, because they all have fans in them, as you can see. Look at this guy. It's so you can see they have gigantic fans, so that doesn't really solve our problem. They have to have a radiator to cool those. So I don't know if the water cooling is the magic answer, but what I do know, well, for one, most of the time the specs are given. Where's our $20-something guy? I had him up here somewhere. Ooh, man, losing my mind. Okay, well, let's go back to the Cooler Master 212, and like I said, because I know I like him, and this is what I've used on all my computers, and it's probably going to be holding up for a long time. And you can see, a 5-star rating. But what's important here is we go down to the details, and we will find, for one, there's airflow, and that's really, really important if you're overclocking and all that business, which I never do that, I don't care. But noise level is the big one. Dun, dun, dun. Always, we have to look for this. And this one can go between 13 and 32. And you may ask, well, why between 13 and 32? Well, these fans will go slow. At least this is a modern feature that most computers do utilize, is the fans go slow whenever the computer's not being pushed, and when you push it, the computer gets hot. The airflow says, hey, we need some more airflow. Give me some of this. Okay, so what is important is noise level. And oops. Okay, and you can see this one here is 13 to 32 dBA, which is indicative of how noisy this thing is. And you may ask, well, why 13 to 32? Well, that's because these fans are designed to speed up when the CPU gets really hot. That's a modern feature in the modern BIOSes and all that sort of jive. So it's very common for these things to get hot or get loud whenever the computer gets hot. So we have a range. Now, when we're pushing a computer hard, you can guess what? Just automatically assume that we're running really hot. Now, in theory, the big fan size will allow us to run slower and won't need to be running at full blast. But all that gets real tricky. And so what I've kind of done, and I think this is a very common thing, is I will just go to where are we at here? I guess it's normal O shopping here. I don't know if I can add a whole lot to it, but go to the fans and heat sinks so we can see them all. And then I'm going to sort by highest rated. Okay, and where the hell is all that? Oh yeah, we got to break it down first. CPUs and processors. Whoops. CPU fans and heat sinks. Okay. And now I'm going to search by reviews. Best rating in this particular case. And they'll have $1 million ones and all this sort of stuff. And then what I'm going to do is take a look at how loud each one of these is. And we just looked at the one, my favorite one here. But here's one for $50. Now, and again, this is only really a factor if you are in a situation where your computer is in your room. If you can get the computer out of the room, well, who cares? It can be, a jet engine, within reason. And most of these, nicer heat sinks are not going to be too bad. But, okay, this one's loudest is 27.5 dBA. So even when this thing is running at full blast, it's still maybe 3 decibels quieter. So is it worth 3 decibels for $25? Well, that depends on what $25 is worth to you. But I can tell you, every little inch counts with this noise business in most cases. So one other thing I want to talk about here while I'm ranting about the ultra interesting world of heat sinks is many of these processors will come with the heat sink included. And so it gets real. I've confused this a million times, and and I've had to reorder stuff and all this because I've goofed up. But it's always good to look for heatsink whenever we're buying the processor itself, because sometimes they have like their little OEM version and this other kind of version, and it's really easy to mess up. So I don't see where it should be telling us. Maybe on the details. I'll search for heatsink. Okay, in this particular case, the heatsink and fan are included. So for you guys on a budget, you might just want to go with the stock one because it's free. And I guarantee the stock one will keep it cool. The issue is, will it be cool and quiet? So if quiet is an ultra issue, you're almost always better off going with a much bigger heatsink with a big old fan that we can kind of control the RPM of. So anyway, this is really confusing, and also I would say is you don't have to spend $1 million on these things. There are fancy designs out there and different ways of going, and maybe there are some benefits to it. But by me keeping my computer just with extension cables in another room, I've had awesome luck by just running these $25 there it is $25 Cooler Master. But when in doubt, as technology changes, just use Google and cuss a lot. All right, guys, out.